I'm still joined, of course, by Kate Partridge, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Reid from Young Voices UK. What is it?
What is Young Voices?
Yeah.
Young Voices is an organisation that gives young people a platform and a way into the media and helps them, you know, get their voice out there, teach them how to write articles, how to do interviews like this. And so I hope that we're bringing a bit more kind of diversity of voices, diversity of perspectives, so that you have all these fresh ideas coming through on, especially on new channels like TalkTV.
Yeah, so just to be clear, are you somebody who set it up? Did you train people, or are you somebody who's been trained and has come through the system?
A bit of both. So Young Voices existed in America before I was involved.
Right.
But I started the UK branch, and I run the UK wing of it, and I work with about a dozen people in the UK, across the country.
And what the profile of the people that you tend to bring in?
So they tend to be either students or recent graduates of all kinds of different political persuasions, all kinds of different policy interests, people interested in politics, in housing, in culture, in education, healthcare and everything, all kinds of different interests, and people who just want to get their voice out there a bit.
Now look, he sounds like the expert to me. So how do you want to do this, Jason? There's two ways of doing it. We can go through your stories or go through the front pages first. Which you want to do?
Let's do a bit of both, shall we?
Let's do a bit of both. Well, OK, so I'll tell you what, you've got your list of stories, which I will give back to you. Get on with it. So what's your first story?
So the first story is on the front page of the Mail on Sunday, which is about Keir Starmer and his apparent support for the rail strikes. So this seems to contradict what he's been saying publicly about how he's said nobody wants to see strikes, and he's been echoing the sentiment that a lot of people are feeling about frustration with the strikes that are going on. But this is a leak that the Mail on Sunday have got their hands on, which seems to suggest a bit of hypocrisy. It seems to suggest, certainly as Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has been putting it, that he is just going along with what his trade union paymasters would want him to say. And so there's a bit of hypocrisy going on. There's certainly a lot of questions being asked, as always, about what Keir Starmer actually stands for, what his policy position actually is, and whether people can actually put their support behind him.
Hasn't there been... Look, I mean, I think there's 2 points to make. Let's just set aside the fact that I think that Keir Starmer is terrible, and the reason I think he's terrible is because I just think he's completely out of touch with northern voters, particularly on the issue of Brexit, where he attempted to stymie Brexit, and frankly, when he went off and negotiated with Michel Barnier behind the back of the British government, it was not a criminal offence. In the United Kingdom, it would have been in America. I wish it had been a criminal offence. I'd have personally locked the bloke up if I could have. So that's my view on him. But it is incredibly difficult to be the Labour leader, because on the one hand, actually, you do want to be in bed with the trade union movement. They are the people that set up your political party. They do provide absolutely millions. But at the same time, when these rail disputes happen, in order to get the middle ground, you've got to pretend that you don't support the unions. It is impossible for him, isn't it?
It is a difficult position to be in, but at the same time, that is the nature of politics. He's got to pick a side. We've had very clearly there are two wings, at least, within the Labour Party. You've got New Labour and you've got Jeremy Corbyn's kind of hardline socialism. Now, Keir Starmer has, on the one hand, very much distanced himself from Jeremy Corbyn, in fact, going as far as kicking him out of the party. But on the other hand, he's very keen to resist the idea that he's just going back to Blairism, despite the fact that he has promoted some of the biggest Blairite names back to his cabinet, such as Yvette Cooper. But at some point, there comes a point where you have to choose what you believe in. You have to choose what manifesto you're presenting to the country.
So first of all, Kate, I'm going to say this to you. I personally believe this story in the Mail on Sunday, because I believe, it just logically seems to me, that Keir Starmer is going to have a go at the rail strikes publicly, but behind the scenes is probably much less anti the strikes. But, you know, does it surprise you? Is this something that you see regularly as a journalist, this sort of public statement by politicians, when behind the back you know that they don't really feel that way?
I think it's all the time, isn't it? As I said, we were talking about earlier about the fact now that there's a whole level of media and perception and spin and public relations. It's also quite interesting because today Keir Starmer is going to be making a speech where he's effectively lambasting both the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary and saying that he thinks that they want the strike so that they can use that sense of division in the country to be able to feed on it and play on it.
Now, look, I'm going to throw something out which is also in the Mail on Sunday. I just want to show you... page 4 which is effectively, once again, it's by Glenn Owen. He's on fire today. But this is about this idea that Brexit is being stymied by Whitehall, that we are constantly in a position where Whitehall is not up for it. They're not being supportive. Now, I don't know which way either of you votes on Brexit, but it doesn't actually bother me. It's not a particularly important issue. What's an important issue is this element of just being so defeatist, this element of the Theresa May concept that Brexit was a problem that had to be dealt with, and now Whitehall just obsessing about sort of making Brexit as minimal as possible and as unsuccessful as possible. You know, am I being a conspiracy theorist here, Jason?
I don't think so. I really think we'd moved past this point, to be honest. Maybe it's just because we spent so long talking about COVID and nothing else that we kind of forgot about Brexit. But there is a sort of bubbling resentment that's coming up again about Brexit, partly from Whitehall. There's another article in the Observer talking about Stella Creasy, the Labour MP, saying that Labour needs to take a firmer stance on Brexit and needs to start representing the 48% of people who voted to remain in the European Union. Yeah, I mean, that's a disaster. If you look at the Red Wall collapsed. So, of course, I go on about the fact that I live in Windsor simply because there's a lot of news that goes on there. But I'm originally from Lee. I mean, when I was in 1997, when Ed Young ran for Lee, he was defeated by something like 25,000. James Grundy, the Conservative MP for Lee, has a majority of about 3. And you think 25,000 Labour majority, one of the safest seats in the country. And you've got this idiot Cooper turning around saying what we need to do is give them another kicking. It's incredible. I mean, the Liberal Democrats tried, didn't they, a few years ago to represent the 48%, and they made themselves the party of Remain and then Rejoin, and it completely backfired. And the Tories won their stonking majority in 2019 on a platform of getting Brexit done. This is a debate that's in the past. Nobody outside of Islington, I don't think, wants to rerun this debate and have it all over again. But it seems that there is a small but growing faction within the Labour Party, and it seems some civil servants in Whitehall as well, who just do not want to drop this and who just want to keep on pushing at this.
I saw a brilliant interview with Stephen Kinnock, and he said maybe we should do this. There was a problem in Norway where twice the Norwegians voted not to join the EU, so we had to find a way around that. So we got them associate members. And then you think, couldn't you just have said they don't want to join it because they think it's crap? I mean, is that beyond the realms of possibility? I mean, Kate,
referendums, it seems to be a common theme, doesn't it? The fact you get a referendum and people think you can have another one. I mean, we've sort of seen this up in Scotland as well, in the fact that, you know, people voted to remain in that sense, but now that the SNP, they also want to have another referendum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I was going to talk about Northern Ireland, but I still don't know what Michelle McManus's real name is. Right. While you're going to the next story, I'm going to Google what Michelle McManus's real name is. That is the proposed First Minister of Northern Ireland. Come on, somebody in the gallery's got to tell me what Michelle McManus's real name is. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, on the theme of Keir Starmer's leadership, on page 6 of The Sun is a story from Keir Starmer saying Labour needs to get ready to replace me. It seems that he is starting to become a little bit more worried as the days go on about this Durham police investigation into Beergate, and of course that promise he made that if he is charged, if he is given a fine or a fixed penalty notice, he will step down as leader of the Labour Party. And so incredibly, it seems that he's actually been saying to members of his shadow cabinet that they need to get their act together and have their campaigns ready to go just in case he has to disappear one day.
So, OK, Kate, who was in the right? If you get a if you believe that you have not broken COVID rules, but you are proved to be wrong and you get a fixed penalty notice, who is right? The Prime Minister just saying, forget about it, move on. I thought I was in the right. I've discovered I'm in the wrong. Who cares? And Keir Starmer saying, if I get a fixed penalty notice, it's a resignation issue.
Well, I'd say it comes down to the point we were talking about earlier. It shows a complete dearth of leadership either way, doesn't it? Because neither is a particularly convincing answer.
Yeah,
you have one who's completely defeated.
Do you know what I would have done? I would have concluded, look, there's a third option. Yeah. Right, do you remember when we discovered that Finder's lasagna was made 100% from horse meat? Right, it was a genuine scandal. Right, my argument was, let's just keep eating horse meat. We clearly like it. Right, from my point of view, you know what the real answer for Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer should be? We shouldn't have had a lockdown. Right, you know, when people are turning around and saying, and like in my case, I wasn't able to visit my mum when she was dying in hospital. Right, I'm not particularly bothered that we were getting drunk in Downing Street. I don't care that Keir Starmer was having a curry. I care that I couldn't break the rule. That's what I care about. I desperately wanted to break the rule. Send me a fixed penalty notice, baby. I would have been absolutely delighted.
But you didn't have the choice.
That's right. So of course, what annoys me is they're all sat there with this glutinous piety going on about how we all have to lock down. Oh, we're all going to die, and then of course they're all getting going out on the lash with their mates.
And but they're also getting caught at the end of the day. And the naivety of thinking that you can't get caught these days is ridiculous. When frankly, on your phone, you can tell the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, OK, so Jason, in your opinion, how serious is it for Keir Starmer? Because we all remember the Tony Blair situation where he said that if he was interviewed by the police under caution over sale of honours, he would resign. Now, I'm not going to make any comment about the whole defence that said, if you give me the money as a loan and I don't pay any interest, that's not a donation, therefore it's not a criminal offence. Let's just, because all that's going to happen is Mark Randall's hands quivering over the dump button, right? So, but let's just say that was his defence, and some people felt that it wasn't the best defence ever. But, one thing that was also very clear was when the Metropolitan Police discovered that it was a prime ministerial resignation issue to simply interview him, they decided that they weren't going to interview him as a result. So there is political pressure now on Durham Police.
There's a huge amount of pressure, and this has just become incredibly messy. This is a story, I think, that should have gone away a long time ago, and I think the fact that we've reached this point speaks to, I'm afraid, Keir Starmer's lack of political judgment, because, of course, when all the Partygate stories were coming out about Boris and about other people in the government, he was a very, very big cheerleader for making a huge thing of it, calling for Boris to resign right from the beginning, even when there were no fixed penalty notices, and so he really had no choice if he was going to remain credible when the allegations about Partygate came out.
Do you think that this wasn't Keir Starmer being pious? It wasn't Keir Starmer trying to show leadership. He just couldn't do anything by that point other than offer to resign if he got fixed penalty notice.
I think it might have been, an act of desperation at that point, because the Labour Party at the moment is so bereft of ideas. They don't know what they stand for, they don't know what they believe in, and so when something like Partygate comes along, they can't help leaping on it, latching onto it, and making a huge thing of it, even when it's against their own interests, because Keir Starmer presumably knew that he was at least pushing or playing with the rules when he had that infamous curry and beer night in Durham, and so now he's got himself in this predicament.
I mean, the thing that really upsets me is I just hate the whole concept of finding a loophole. It's kind of, oh, well, we put in the rules, you're not allowed to have a party, but we've found a way round it for ourselves. Whereas actually the reality is that, the spirit of the rules were broken by all of them. Right, the spirit. Yeah. Now, if they manage to find a loophole, well, whoopee-doo. You're meant to be the people in charge. By the way, we are going to go to break in a second, but I did want to talk to you about what was on page 7 of The Sun as well, which is, I'll just read this to you. Britain's top general has told every soldier to prepare to fight Russia in a potential World War III. General Sir Patrick Sanders, the army's new commander, said that Vladimir Putin's bloodbath assault on Ukraine had rocked the foundations of global security. Now, look, the guy's not a lunatic. He's not saying we are going to war with Russia, but what he's saying is we now need to prepare for that eventuality, it may be World War III, and we need to be ready to win. A sensible thing to say for a bloke who's new in the job?
I think it's personally, I think it's a strange thing to say, because even though on a practical basis, yes, I can understand because of the ramifications and the fact that you've only effectively have to cross the border into Russia, a misdirected missile or something like that. But I was always under the impression, because of the way and the rhetoric of what is coming out of Russia, is that effectively it's now going to go to the ultimate war, isn't it? And is that really boots on the ground?
Well, I mean, I don't think he's talking necessarily about an invasion of Ukraine. He's just talking about an escalation, isn't he?
But if it is an escalation, I always thought the escalation was nuclear, wasn't it?
Well, but I think we've really pussied out, and let me explain why. Because the people of Europe voted overwhelmingly to put the Eurovision Song Contest in Ukraine. What do you win? You win the right to host the competition. And then bureaucrats are going, oh, it's too dangerous to have it in Ukraine. What we should do, if we had any sense whatsoever, we'd announce we're going to have it in Kiev and then say to Vladimir Putin, shoot a rocket if you are that mentally ill.
Yeah, but at the same time, it'd be brilliant to have it in Britain, won't it? We can ship over all the Ukrainian TV presenters and whoever they want.
I have major fears, actually, about Glasgow. I'll tell you why I've got fear about Glasgow, because I think, and no disrespect to people listening in Scotland, I think there is a faction within Scotland who will try and make it a Scottish event. whereas actually it needs to be a Ukrainian event. And do you know what I'd do? I'd personally make the O2 Arena the chancellery of Ukraine, i.e. the embassy, for one night only.
Blue and yellow.
Yeah, literally. Just say, no, all the guests are Ukrainian, right? We'll get all the refugees in the UK. Look, there wasn't 200,000, but there's a fair number. Get them all over, get Zelensky in there, right? And but of course, the problem is what Glasgow will do. They will try, well, not all Glaswegians, but some of them will try to host it as a Glasgow event, and that, I think, is a real mistake. But I have to say, chickening out of sticking it in Ukraine, I think, is a big mistake, and I don't understand why a bureaucrat makes that decision when Ukraine won the competition. And by the way, 450 votes for that terrible song. Unbelievable. Anyway, I'm back in a couple of moments with Jason Reed and indeed Kate Partridge. And we're going to be talking more about the front page of the papers and indeed everything else. See you after this. Policy, so no court could arbitrate as far as I was concerned. I'd just send in the Navy. Anyway, there we have it. Come on, boom. He's doesn't matter. Daryl's back next week. Anyway,
permanently. Yeah,
that's right. Get him out. Get that loony off.
Enjoy it while you can.
We're not having him. Anyway, so what we got next, Jason?
On the front page of the Sunday Times this morning is Boris Johnson saying, "Steel yourselves for a long war." He's warning, speaking to the entire Western world, and saying that we must prove to Putin that the West is not fickle. He knows that Putin is not going to back down anytime soon. He's invested himself in this war in Ukraine, and so he is telling us to prepare that we're going to be in this for the long haul. This is not going away anytime soon. So a similar theme to what you were talking about before the break, with the top generals saying that British soldiers even need to be prepared for some kind of escalation here. This is not going away. And
but if you think about it, Moldova is at war with Transnistrian separatists, right? But the reality is Transnistria is a country, right? You may hate that fact, right? You may not like the fact that Crimea is now effectively Russia. But that is the position. And so when you say, let's steel ourselves for a long campaign, aren't we really saying that Ukraine ain't getting its territory back very soon? But the reality is, I think the actual violence, in terms of the military violence, I think is going to be over pretty soon, Kate, right?
I think the only issue you have there is because of what's happened in terms of the polarisation of the population in Ukraine, whereas before you'd have a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians. There is now a big sort of social divide as to who's going where. And what's going to happen, it's not so much Russia winning the war, it's winning the peace.
Yes.
Because in trying to encircle Ukraine and cut off by effectively linking up Transnistria and the Crimea and effectively the whole coast along Odessa and then cutting off Ukraine from its seaports, then that's when you're going to have a problem, because then you're going to have to deal with a disaffected population.
But there is another element of it. In my local Indian restaurant, hear me out on this. In my local Indian restaurant, there's a bloke who worked there. He used to describe himself as a Transnistrian Russian. He now describes himself as a Romanian Moldovan, right? And I think there is a huge element now, not of people being dishonest, but of people saying, I've just changed sides. And I think there's a huge number of people. I mean, when the Russian army marched into Ukraine, they were expecting loads and loads of support from the Russian ethnic areas that wanted to become part of Russia. And those areas still do want to become part of Russia, but they weren't very keen on killing people in Bucha and shelling Kiev. They weren't, because
and they weren't expecting it either.
Well, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same as turning round to British soldiers now and saying we're going to invade the Republic of Ireland, right? Because effectively, okay, they're Irish people and whatever. They're not English people, but I mean, still, you wouldn't want to kill them on some political whim.
Well, what is the way out for Putin here? This is going to be...
I think, Jason, it's bullet in the back of the head in a car park in the Kremlin. I genuinely do.
But then who puts that bullet there is the next question.
Well, we were hoping... I mean, we were bullying oligarchs deliberately, weren't we? Because we thought that might work. To be fair, it hasn't. Really?
Well, we did hear a lot of rumblings about, movement at the top of government. There's certainly a lot of unhappiness with what Putin is doing. We've had people rebelling on state TV and talking about the invasion being a mistake and the state narratives being false and so on. There is still a lot of opposition there, which has the potential to build. But
not so much in Russia itself.
This is a good point.
This is the whole point, is the fact that if you were to look at or take a snapshot of what a lot of Russian people think, when you look at the media landscape within Russia itself, it is very, very state-dominated. And if you look at some of the reports by Steve Rosenberg from the BBC and some of the stuff that he effectively sends out about what they're actually showing on the television, gradually there is a decreasing of the access to all other opinions, and this is the whole point as well.
I've got a system, and it's a little bit naughty, but I've got a system on my computer where you can watch any news channel in the world pretty much, and I started watching Belarusian TV, and the week of the invasion every single channel was showing programmes about the German invasion of Belarus in 1943 and the genocide where 1 in 4 Belarusians were killed. Now, look, at the end of the day, I'm not saying that these films were made for the purposes of propaganda. They weren't, right? But it was just every channel was going on about Nazis, going on about Germans, going on about the Holocaust, going on about genocide, going on about villages being burnt. I don't know if any of you've seen the film Come and See, which was made during the Soviet era, reputed to be the most frightening film ever. It's about the Belarusian genocide. It's worth a watch, but it's terrifying. But of course, they're all watching that, and it all talks this narrative that this is an exercise to stop neo-Nazi factions. Now, there is another important point, and I say this as somebody who's done humanitarian aid work for Ukraine. You know, it's important to bear in mind that Ukraine is not the Garden of Eden, right? It's a former Soviet republic, and elements of the Azov regiment have behaved absolutely atrociously against Russian separatists. But it does not get away from the fact that Russians are being largely lied to.
So what happens next? Is this a new Cold War front that we're seeing? You're talking about, you know, the polarisation of people. War. Exactly, yeah. And if this, if it's a proxy war or a real war, I don't know. But if it just continues, and if the front moves from east to west a little bit, are we just entering this new age where for decades, for maybe a century now, we'll have the West and Russia just sort of tit for tat going against each other, and it means that the violence just continues?
Well,
absolutely.
That's what we'd anticipated. That's why we kept saying we don't see with the invasion, or the special operation, the invasion, whatever it is they want to call it, we couldn't see what they'd have to actually gain long term, because the mindset was wrong. What we couldn't understand is they'd effectively, instead of having people who would have been benign towards any kind of redefining of some of the borders in some areas, effectively now you have polarisation. And this is why we couldn't believe that was actually going to happen, of course, and then when it did, it was like, what are they going to gain?
But can I say something about our own racism? Genuinely about our own racism. We don't care if it's Ho Chi Minh. We're not bothered about Kim Il-sung. We're not bothered even about the Farcists against the Colombian government. The minute it's a bunch of white people, we get rattled, right? It's all fine when it's Moscow and Washington DC controlling something that happens in Korea, or something that happens in Vietnam, or something that happens in China. It's when it's a bunch of white people, and that I'm afraid is a despicable opinion to hold.
But
in
it's
reality.
Also close. The key
that's
point
right.
It's also actually close. It's geographically close as well. I mean, and as I said, we'd had peace in Europe for so long. The whole idea that it would be completely fractured is something that goes against our mindset. But then if you were to look back actually over time, to begin with it was a big shock, and then you look over time and you think, yeah, I can kind of see the signs. I can see some of the signs coming out of the diplomacy over time. That sense of that they felt aggrieved about what they saw as NATO encroachment. It's just the fact it seemed like a very quick thing, a very quick change of opinion. But as I said, you look over time and you see a few hints in the rhetoric over the last few years.
But Kate, you used to live in Russia, and we've made clear that whilst Kate's a journalist and she lived in Russia, you were a sports journalist in Russia, so it's important that we don't sort of Walter Mitty this. But at the same time, I get the impression with the Russians that they feel that every generation has to have their suffering, and there's just, rather than all this hardship affecting them, it's more like it's our patriotic duty to have to go through all this hardship. And in some respects, it's almost like the Blitz. It's making them more steely.
I think that's also propaganda, though. I think that's also how effectively, every country that goes into a war will have that sense of blitz spirit, won't they? Whether they're either the aggressor that feels that they have a cause, or whether they're effectively the country that has been invaded. So I think that kind of goes with everybody. But in sense of suffering, I would say that the stereotype of the Russian is a reasonable one. I mean, one of the first words you learn is ужасно, это ужасно, everything's terrible. You know, they are a glass half empty kind of people, and they will say that. You know, they can't understand that whole American have a nice day. why are you stupid? What's nice about it? What the hell's good about it? Why are you smiling? If you smile walking down the road, they say, Durak, you know, you're an idiot. What are you smiling for? Like, you know, if you've got wind, you know, you're clearly something wrong, you know. So they have that mindset, which is very funny. But it is in complete contrast to, say, Australians or sunny-natured, optimistic kind of people. No, they're not. I
remember when I went to Moscow in about 1993 with a school trip, and we were laughing about the Russian translations of American films. So basically, one of the films, there was somebody running along going, Jenny! And the Russian voice sort of went, Jenny. That was it. Yeah. Like, no attempt.
That's exactly what it's
performance.
Like. But, it's terrible in a way. Because everything has now become polarised, you can't actually now nobody can say a good thing about Russia. But not all Russian people think that way. You know, there are opinions on both sides. But in the time before all the war and when it was good, that kind of, understated sense of humour, I think.
So how effective do you think it is, the propaganda and the narrative that's being pushed? We're seeing ridiculous things like McDonald's being rebranded in Russia because it's now no longer actually McDonald's, and of course the narrative being pushed about how the West is the one declaring the war on Russia and Russia's the victim. Do you think because of that pessimistic mentality they buy into that?
The one thing about the way the Russian people think that I've always thought is interesting and in direct contrast to what we've been talking about in the West is that they really love a strong leader. You're looking at the biggest landmass in the world. You've got 11 time zones and you've got a population of fluctuating probably about 140, 150 million. So it's very spread out, and particularly in the big cities. So St. Petersburg, Moscow, maybe Yekaterinburg, and then effectively Vladivostok and all the rest of it. It's very spread out, that kind of infrastructure. So they've always, to me, looked at a strong leader in admiration. You know, that whole idea of Putin wrestling a bear kind of thing.
Not for war, just for national unity.
And just in terms of a mindset, they like a strong leader. They admire a strong man. Not for nothing would you see the pictures of, you know, Putin stripped off to the waist wrestling a bear or something like that.
But the problem, one of the big issues, and I was an election monitor in Latvia, right? One thing, and I'm not being critical of Russian people, but they didn't realise that Right Said Fred were a camp-act, did they? Right? You see them like, oh yeah, let's get the tight white t-shirt, stonewashed jeans, and bick my head. You go, no. Right Said Fred, they were, you know, they were sexy, right? You know, they were kind of. But the other thing that I spotted, you know, Vladimir Putin. Let's be clear. I mean, he just looks like the Gay Times magazine, right? Everything he does. I'll tell you what, let's get the top off of the cowboy hat. And you think, oh, come on. Like,
masculine. It's a concept of masculinity.
But does nobody find it homoerotic apart from me?
I was going to say, perhaps it says.
Oh, I love Uncle Vladimir. Oh, I love Uncle.
Slavic relations.
I'll tell you what, I look forward to seeing Uncle Vladimir with his top off, little tassels. No, I'm joking.
Let's not even go there, but because they were a very isolated people. I'll give you an example. I used to have one of the guys that was in my team is called Alexander, obviously Sasha. So Sasha was the most angelic guy you could ever possibly imagine, and always happy and really lovely. And because they'd grown up in this, even though it's a huge landmass, it was very isolated. There wasn't travel, there wasn't diversity, there was no mixing of anybody other than people within the Soviet Union. And I can remember him saying, he said, when I first saw black students, he said, come to Moscow, he said, I went up to him and was like, oh, can I have your autograph? And he said, why? And I said, why did you do that, Sash? He said, because I thought they were members of Boney M. You know, and he had that kind of, you know, because that's it. You know, this is the first black people he'd ever seen, and they must be pop stars because they're allowed into the country. They, you know, sing Rasputin for me like that. And this bloke had obviously come over to study medicine or something.
Yeah, that's right. They're just absolutely going absolutely wild. Mind you, I'm not being funny though. If somebody thought I was Boney M, I'd run with it. Right? Yeah, I mean, do you remember?
I think this. The Sasha ended up buying him a load of drinks.
I remember there was a counsellor in Romford years ago called Ted Eden, right? And he was telling me all these stories. He was going, he talk like that. And he goes, oh, I remember that night when I was out drinking with John Wayne. Right? And he was telling all these stories. And he goes to me, you don't believe any of my stories, do you? And I went, well, it is a bit unbelievable that you're drinking with Sylvester Stallone, like all these people. And he goes, it's because I look like Jimmy Carter, and he did, and I thought, you actually do look like Jimmy Carter. So of course, what he'd do, he said he was a computer salesman from Romford, and he'd go round to all these hotels and he'd go, can I buy you a drink, Mr. President? And he'd go, I'm not your president, I'm a counsellor from Havering, but I'll have the drink off you. And they go, oh well, let's just get
photo opportunity.
That's right. He looks like Jimmy Jimmy Carter. Just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyway, what more have you got?
What else have we got? Well, in the Sunday Express, we've got Douglas Ross on page 14, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, pushing back very hard in a very forceful article against Nicola Sturgeon, calling for a second Scottish independence referendum. And, of course, as you would expect, as the leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, pushing back on that and saying, no, we do not need another referendum on independence. And I think making some good points about how quite incredible it is that Nicola Sturgeon, despite what is going on in the country, what's going on in the world, whatever is happening in the current moment, she just continues banging this one drum again and again, and she will not give up until she ends up as Supreme Leader of an independent Scotland.
I have significant worries about an independent Scotland, and I'll tell you one of them. I mean, first of all, when they turned around and they said, what we're going to do is divide up the assets. No. I mean, the idea that you're going to leave a club. I mean, when I left the Scouts, I didn't demand a percentage of the hut. Do you know what I mean?
Well, when we had Brexit, we paid millions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I heard that from Brexiteers. They were going, right, what we should do is we want some of our buildings back that we built in Brussels. No, that's not the way a club works. You pay your membership fee and then you leave and you cease to pay. But I have to say, some of the ideas that the Scottish National Party have come up with, I think are hellishly damaging for England, England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. This idea that they're going to abolish their security services and bring in 500,000 migrants to Scotland, what they will do is jump immediately onto the train and go to London. The Irish Republic has the same level of security as Belfast to protect the United Kingdom. If they're not going to do that, we are going to have to build a big wall and have immigration posts. Fact.
The whole idea of an independent Scotland completely crumbles under any kind of scrutiny, and we've failed, even though we've had a referendum on it, we've still failed, I think, to have a proper, sensible discussion about what it could look like, because if we did, everyone would realise how completely implausible it is and how ridiculous the idea is. You know, they are asked simple questions, like, for example, what currency would you use? And the first answer is the euro, and then, hang on a minute, do you have any of the qualifications you need to enter the Eurozone? No, you don't. Oh, don't worry, we'll just continue using the pound. Well, hold on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea that an independent Scotland would have 50% of the seats on the Bank of England is plainly ludicrous. Plainly, I think they should become the first country to not bother having a currency at all. I think there's no reason why you can't have a cash machine with euros. No, just have a cash machine with euros and pounds coming out of it. There's no reason to have. The problem is what they want to do, the Scottish National Party, is effectively an insurance fiddle. Right, now let me explain what I mean by that. As a member of the pound, what would happen is the UK, Rump UK, read England, would pay all the taxes to underwrite the currency, but Scotland would still have a seat on it. What that means is that all of the banks in Scotland would be paying taxes to Scotland in exchange for the support of the central bank, the Bank of England, that they don't pay into. So what they'd be doing is creaming the money off. What they're effectively doing is they're giving you an insurance policy paid for by the English taxpayer, charging you for it and not giving the money to England. That is basically what they're doing. Anyway, somebody said, how old are you, André? 43. Are you living in Windsor? Yes. As a northern fella? Yes, I am. And can you stop shouting? No. So Jenny MK says, Putin, speaking of Peter the Great, means that he's delusional. Peter's goal was a window on the West, meaning modernisation. Putin wants massacres. Do you agree with that, Kate?
Well, I don't know about necessarily wanting massacres, but the perception is absolutely right. I mean, but Peter was an autocrat at the end of the day. There was that combination of being autocratic, but yes, he would sort of, in disguise, sneak around Dartford and places like that and half of the Netherlands trying to get ideas about how the West was modernised, and took them all back to St. Petersburg and created his own capital, basically, with that kind of Venetian style.
Yes.
So, yes, there's a combination of the two things. He was an autocrat, but yes, he looked at the West as the way forward because he wanted to modernise Russia.
Look, and I think I can get away with saying this on radio, as Mark's hand quivers over the button. Look, the reality is Putin and his regime, their number one skill is pilfering from the Russian taxpayer. I mean, it's often said that Vladimir Putin is worth £200 billion. If he's worth a percentage of that, this is a man whose salary is, $90,000 a year, and he's worth, $10 billion. You think, well, and how could that possibly have happened otherwise? I mean, there was a guy they've just sanctioned the Russian deputy prime minister or former deputy prime minister who has a salary of 48,000 a year and has a 5.5 million pound house in Westminster that he doesn't use, he just keeps it as an asset. And you think, well, I mean, it's just ludicrous, isn't it? I mean, if this man has not got his hand in the till, then I just want his investment advice. Because, I mean, turn up with absolutely nothing, earn 90 grand a year and make 200 billion. The guy, I mean, Warren Buffett can just get out of the way, right?
It's incredible. There's a lot of questions need to be asked about where the money in Russia comes from, which obviously we've been hearing a lot about recently with all the sanctions on oligarchs. A lot of that money finding its way into countries in the West, in particular, into property in London, it seems.
Well, I've got a friend of mine who's having a great time at the moment. He works on yachts, and he's currently living on a £150 million yacht that's being impounded, and he's just sort of sunbathing all day. So he's quite enjoying
Where's it
himself.
being impounded? Whereabouts?
Oh,
In Monaco?
I'm not going to give. I can't
Monaco.
give details. Away. Anyway, I'm still going to be joined by Jason Reed from Young Voices UK and indeed Kate Partridge. We're going to be going through all of the papers before Christo comes up at 5 o'clock. All that and more coming up after this. But in the meantime, we've still got Jason Reed from Young Voices UK and Kate Partridge, up with the Partridge, joining me, going through all of the papers. So what have we got next, Jason?
In the Daily Star on page 5, and the Daily Star, of course, a font of knowledge, always can be relied on for some very high-quality journalism. There's a very worrying article which says that masks will be back for the winter, in particular in Germany and other countries across Europe, and potentially here in the UK as well. There is some sort of rumbling that there is a desire to bring back masks on public transport and in restaurants, which I think you'll agree with me, André, is completely insane. Yeah. How have we forgotten how to live normally? COVID, I think the science is very, very clear now that the variants are just not as dangerous as they were. So
there are some people who thoroughly enjoyed the lockdown, though. I mean, I remember in my town people going, you know, there's more people on the... When I was out on the street the other day, there were far too many people out there. And you think, well, what total number were you expecting? I mean, you know, and I think that this suggestion that the lockdown itself has not been damaging. Kate and I discussed, Jason, you weren't here yesterday, but we discussed the 16 billion spent on rail. That's 3 pence on income tax, just on shutting down the railways, subsidising the railways during the coronavirus lockdown. The billions and billions and billions, you know, that Eat Out to Help Out, where you might as well have just taken a blowtorch to the money. It would have made no difference whatsoever. And all the money that's been, and then there's that study, which admittedly other people have disputed, that your average working class child will be £100,000 worse off by the end of their life as a result of the coronavirus lockdown. That's poorer education, lack of language skills and whatever. But either way, we've really hurt people. But people loved it. There were some people who loved baking banana bread and being able to go, oh, I'm doing this for the country. And you think, look, you know, literally you're impersonating Darth Vader and telling me that is good for the country.
The thing is, I mean, I don't really have an issue with that so much. I mean, it's a little bit bonkers, but if you want to go around wearing a mask, good for you, if that makes you happy and you want to...
And I mean, with a lot of them, it is an improvement.
Quite possibly, yeah.
But that's so nasty. That's so nasty.
Moving on quickly from
the dump button didn't get pressed then. It was all right. It was all right. We got away with it.
I'm really worried about politicians who just seem to have got it into their heads that this is a normal thing to do now, is that any time you get bored... I always felt that was the biggest danger of the lockdown, that it would just become part of the public health repertoire. Yeah. So what now will happen? Anytime there is any form of an outbreak of anything, there will be people, now we don't know if they'll succeed, but there will be people saying lockdown, local lockdown, masks, you know, mandatory vaccinations. And I mean, I remember going on one or other TV show. I mean, I did it loads of times, debating people who are going, we need mandatory vaccinations because people are refusing. And then you go, well, hang on a second, the BCG take-up is, 65%. HPV for girls is at something like 70%. The take-up of the coronavirus vaccine was something like, I forget, 80%. So it was the most successful vaccine rollout ever, and yet we wanted to make it a criminal offence not to take the vaccine. And you think, well, I don't understand that. But actually it was because of the othering of people. It was all about being able to say, I'm the virtuous one, I'm the decent one, and you lot are all bad. That was what it was all about. I think it was, and this kind of nanny-statism doesn't just end with COVID, it doesn't even just end with vaccines for diseases. There's a very clear mission creep going on, led, by the way, by the World Health Organization, that is infecting governments around the world.
That bogus doctor. a bogus doctor, Dr. Tedros. I mean, I'll tell you why I say bogus doctor, because first of all, he is the first person who is not a medical doctor to hold that post. And when he wanders around calling himself Dr. Tedros, I'm afraid he leads people to believe that he is a medical doctor. He is not. He's a PhD. He does have a doctorate. But by the way, how many scientists call themselves doctor? They put PhD at the end of the name. So I'm comfortable calling him bogus doctor. But what he did during that pandemic, remember, he was absolutely committed to preventing China being in any way blamed for that. And that was his number one outcome. The reason is he's in the pocket of the Chinese Communist Party. They financed his rise to power. But the other thing that upsets me about the UN, the World Health Organization, all these, the muggins countries pay for all this, remember? So whilst China is expanding their field of influence with this bogus doctor, who's paying the bill? We are, the idiots.
And interestingly, on that topic, there was another story in the Mail on Sunday today saying that Dr. Tedros has finally come to the conclusion that maybe COVID might have come from a lab in Wuhan, in China, after all. Now, of course, this is something that he very, very vehemently denied early on.
But do you know what upset me about it? He vehemently denied it when you knew he had no evidence one way or the other. He vehemently denied it as a matter of course. Now, the reality is, I don't know where coronavirus came from. I've got no idea whether it came from, you know, a bird, a bat, a lab, or anything. But what annoyed me was that this man presents himself as somebody who's a neutral public health official, and he is simply not. He's an apparatchik of Communist China.
And so it's unsurprising. I don't know if you saw that interview, or attempted interview, from a journalist with a senior representative at the World Health Organization at the height of the pandemic, asking about the success of Taiwan in fighting COVID and doing it without so many restrictions. And this doctor from the World Health Organization kept just refusing to answer the question, refusing to acknowledge.
That's right, because
Taiwan's
they're so interested. They're so interested in World Health that they won't allow Taiwan to be a member because China won't let them. And by the way, it's us paying the bill. We're paying the bill. They must be.
That's what Donald Trump said.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right.
And the whole thing is Donald Trump has gone along in several... I mean, whatever you think of Donald Trump and the
I think he's fantastic.
polarising...
I think we've made that very clear throughout this broadcast. I think it's very clear that I am not...
It's safe to say, yeah.
I think it's reasonable to say that I'm not a socialist.
Yeah. Well, but the point was, he did point out some of these things, didn't he? He would point out about the fact the people who paid and the people who didn't. And at the end of the day, whatever you think about him, his policies, a lot of the comments that he made economically were about who was paying and who wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Very often accurate.
Now, where are we up to next? What do you want to do now?
So on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, going back to the story about the rail strikes, this remarkable development that has angered the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, perhaps unsurprisingly. It seems that, as the headline puts it, unions are bribing workers to strike. There seems to have been payments have gone up for the workers who have gone on strike. So it really undermines the narrative that they've been pushing.
It does strike me, though, that Kwasi Kwarteng is the only other Kwasi other than Modo. Right, there's Quasimodo and Kwasi Kwarteng. It's not a popular name, is it, really?
It's not. Maybe we need more representation for
We
Quasis.
need more Quasis knocking about. But on a serious note, I mean, I do think that this strike is so politically motivated. You know, the RMT have freely admitted that part of it is that they just don't like the Conservative government. Now, I don't have a problem with them liking or disliking any government, but there's an attempt, effectively, to bring down the government, to use union power. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's only, you can only even flirt with the idea of it being acceptable to do this kind of thing if they were in dire straits and they'd not had a pay rise in a century. And of course, that's what they've been saying, is that we are really struggling and we need more money. And on the other hand, we find out details like this, that there are all these very questionable tax-free payments being made to members of these unions who go along with the strikes. And suddenly it brings into question whether or not there's sincerity
and of course, the bloke who goes, all change Waterloo, all change on the platform, is on 40,000 a year. I mean, he's doing all right, you know. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these... I mean, look, I understand why they're angry about the pension. I understand that. But the reality is, nobody in the private sector gets a final salary pension anymore. It's just not realistic.
This is something that the French do, not the British. I think this is something that we did in the 70s, we don't do in the 21st century. This is the kind of thing we need to be putting behind us, holding the whole country to ransom because you're unhappy and having a, you know, pay dispute in a negotiation with your boss. This is not the way to deal with anything. Unionism and just sort of building up the unions to be these all-powerful organisations, which, by the way, as we were discussing earlier, control the Labour Party, it seems, as well, just doesn't solve any problems.
There's also another couple of points here as well. I mean, one of them is the fact that they're now having a rail strike at a time when actually 25% of passengers don't go back on the trains anyway.
Yeah.
So in a way, you could well argue that they're shooting themselves in the foot by doing this, because people will then find even more alternatives. Or even so, because we've had wearing masks and working from home, a lot of people, well, they just work from home.
Well, I do think that one thing that's good that's come out is the whole working from home thing. I do think it's crazy that we're all packed together in these little flats, and then we all get on the same train at 8 a.m, all arrive at work at 9 a.m, and then go into these offices. I mean, this building, and I don't want to be critical of this building, I don't want to be critical of this company, which I genuinely love, but you know, this is a 17-storey building, and when they said to people that they could work from home, they still managed to put all the newspapers out, they still managed to make all the radio broadcasts, and these floors absolutely emptied. You would be better downsizing all of these big office blocks, turning it into housing and whatever. I mean, I'd have to say, in this building, the only thing I've ever done is brought my laptop and got on the Wi-Fi. I don't believe in the whole, you need a desk, you need a phone. I mean, that's from, you know, comparatively, that's like the Stone Age.
Well, the only thing that has to be done at this particular point is getting the kids in to do their exams.
Yes.
I mean, that's the one thing where...
I mean, bear in mind, not everybody can work from home, but you know, a 10% reduction in commuters is a significant amount. So, I mean, I think what friends of mine have done is basically said, look, we're going to be in for like 2 days a week, and then we're going to be on the phone from... I mean, look, working from home is often working from bed. I mean, you know...
Pyjamas.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And also, we're all eating pizzas for lunch and sort of turned into the size of houses. But anyway...
Having to go out for a run.
Dr. Tedros is probably quite keen on that, isn't he? As long as the dough was imported from Beijing. Absolutely.
Well, all sorts of probably sugar taxes and things to regulate what kind of food you're eating during the day as well, because of course, as we were talking about, the mission creep, they want to tackle obesity, they want, you know, women of childbearing age not to be drinking alcohol, as they put it.
Now, I want to say to you something that I'm very impressed with, Jason. We've got through this paper review, which is now basically finished, and the newspapers that he didn't highlight were the Sunday People. There we go. The Mirror, right, and the Observer. Fantastic.
I did mention the Observer.
Did you?
Stella Creasy and
well, yeah, okay. But it was only a very brief, fleeting reference. Very fleeting reference. Well, look, I mean, I think your organisation is absolutely sensational. And
thank you.
How can people find out more information about it? What happens if somebody wants to join or whatever? Or are you just an elite select group?
We accept applications all the time. We've got a new batch of people joining next month. If you want to check us out, Young Voices UK on all social media, or Google us, or Google me, Jason Reed. I will always respond to your messages and emails about it.
What can these new students expect?
So we have a team of professional editors who work with them to help with their writing, and from personal experience it makes a huge difference in learning how to get your opinion across in a few hundred words very concisely. We do a lot of media training, we do a lot of public speaking training, mentoring, guidance, introductions, webinars and things to the media, everything you could possibly need to want to break into political commentary, and we're there for you.
And how old? You said young, how old?
So from 18 up, the upper age limit is flexible, shall we say.
Calling yourself young.
Yeah, yeah, technically 35, but I mean, we're very, you know, anyone who wants to diversify perspectives out in the media, we're going to work with them.
OK, I've got to remember the names, so big thanks to my producers, Carl Christopher and Adam Bradley, and of course, Mark Randall, and my wonderful, beautiful co-host, Kate Partridge. Thank you so much. Well, next, we've got Christo, who's going to be talking about all of the big issues of the day. He didn't want to come in and do a handover, but then again, you know, he likes to do his own thing. He likes to get in the zone. He likes to know what he's doing. Do check out Young Voices UK. I think it's a really fabulous project, and if anybody's interested in the media industry, I think it's great. I've worked with loads of your guys before, and I think you've done a great thing. Import from the United States of America. Well, all that remains to be said is thank you so much for joining me for these 3